Hi guys, Greg O'Grady here, talking from Greg O'Grady's newsroom. Wanted to give you guys my impressions concerning the Mueller report and what has been released thus far, and a little bit of the conversations that I've seen online, going back and forth on this, on what is in the report, what the report indicates and what it does not indicate, testimony by the Attorney General versus what the special report from the special counsel has actually said. Now, the argument that has been presented to me concerning this is that Bob Mueller has said that Trump acted inappropriately when demanding from McGahn that he fire Mueller. Now, a little bit more context of this was released from the testimony given by the Attorney General Barr, in which he said that the context for this was that Trump believed that there was a conflict of interest, making this sort of directive completely appropriate. Now, Trump has the authority within his purview of the powers of the president to fire Rod Rosenstein or the Attorney General at the time presiding over the special counsel. So, if he fires the special counsel themselves, he is a little bit outside of his authority as far as what he can do, but the left and the media is claiming that Trump tried to indirectly fire Bob Mueller through the Attorney General. Now, that is perfectly within his purview of power. He is absolutely allowed to do that. However, it would be seen as a conflict of interest from Trump, who is being investigated by the special counsel. So that directive is supposed to come through the Attorney General, who reports to Trump. So this is the case that the media is making, that Trump directed McGahn to fire Mueller, who was investigating him, and that was a conflict of interest. However, Trump had said to the New York Times prior to that occurring, that conversation with McGahn occurring, long before that occurred, that Trump viewed Mueller as a conflict of interest. Now, if there is a legitimate conflict of interest from Trump's perspective, it is completely appropriate for Trump to direct the Attorney General to fire Mueller and replace him. Now, that did not happen, as it turns out. He did direct McGahn in order to replace Mueller, but because he had this perception that there was a conflict of interest, it was appropriate for him to report that, as explained by Barr in his testimony before Congress. I've tried to think about this and basically think of how I can explain this in relation to the setting that I am in. I'm a nurse. I work as a charge nurse. Now imagine if my director, who was serving as the president or CEO of a hospital, came in and what happened to be my patient. Now, serving as a patient, she was being taken care of a nurse who was under my charge as a charge nurse, taking care of her, and she did not like this nurse, happened to be the neighbor of this nurse, and felt that it was a conflict of interest because the nurse, as her neighbor, did not like her, and thus she felt she would get subpar care. Now, it would be absolutely within her authority, perceiving this conflict of interest, to order me to replace that nurse with another nurse to take care of her. Now, from her perspective, because of the conflict of interest, she can absolutely do this. It is perfectly within her purview and authority as the CEO and director of the ICU to make this change. However, it is my call, ultimately, as the charge nurse, in charge of that situation involving the ICU and the care of the patient, what I do with my staff. Now, if I look into it and I determine that this conflict of interest, supposedly, is not going to interfere with care or alter the quote-unquote, in this case, investigation, that this would be appropriate, I can tell my director, no, this is fine, and this is going to remain the way it is. At that point, then we have a situation of impasse where the authority becomes a question on who has the appropriate level of clearance to make that change based off the perception. And that is adjudicated through the courts. So in this case, it might go up to the board of directors or the ethics attorney. Who all these people are in the situation, I would be acting as Attorney General, making the call on the determination of complaint of conflict of interest. The director would be Trump, perceiving the conflict of interest, and the nurse would be Bob Mueller, who is doing the investigation or providing the care. The ethics committee would then be the courts or the Supreme Court, where this may end up eventually. Should the Mueller report become a matter of impeachment proceedings. So we will see what actually happens and what occurs. In order for impeachment to occur, there must actually be reason for impeachment, as I understand through the articles of the Constitution. So this will be very interesting to see where it comes from, but this is kind of what I wanted to explain in looking at this and my perception on it. From what I see and what I gather, there is legitimate reason to believe that Trump certainly did feel this way, as he stated to the New York Times prior to giving that directive. And if that is the case, and he did have that reason or that perception, then he would certainly be well within his rights to make that directive to the Attorney General, to Rod Rosenstein, to replace, McGahn, to replace the special counsel at the time, Bob Mueller. So if that was not the case, if he had not had that perception, and McGain truly did believe that he was doing this maliciously in order to try to obstruct justice, McCain would have gone and reported the obstruction of justice, and the fact that he did not would be an obstruction of justice or a conspiracy to obstruction of justice itself. And McGain obviously did not do that, nor is he confessing to having any sort of conspiracy of obstruction of justice, and so it's very hard to make the case that this was either perceived or initiated from the aspect in it or the desire to obstruct justice. And that is the case that Barr made when he presented the evidence, his testimony before Congress. And so I don't really see anything coming out of this, and it's a nuanced situation, and it's an interesting case because of the level of authority at which it occurred. Now, what most people are saying, and what the media is kind of drumming up, is that had anybody else done this, that they would have been imprisoned. And that's absolutely true, because they're not the president, and they don't have that authority. What makes this a unique situation is that there is no one above Trump in order to make this call for Trump on Trump's behalf. You have people who report to Trump, such as the Attorney General, that have to be directed by Trump to make these moves, if they don't do it themselves. So Trump has to communicate this perception to someone in order to get this resolved. The only person that he can communicate this perception to would be the Attorney General, and that's exactly what he did. So in the case where it was you or I, we would have somebody above the investigator investigating us to report this perceived conflict of interest in order for them to decide impartially. There's nobody in this case for Trump to do that with. And so Trump is in an impossible situation where he perceives this conflict of interest, he has to report it, and the only person he can report it to make that call is someone who is subordinate to him. And so the conflict of interest perceived by him in doing such is the fact that he's reporting this conflict of interest perception to a subordinate who is then being said to be taking it as a command and that he is interfering with or impeding the investigation. And that's certainly not the case. If you or I were to go to a police official above an investigator who is investigating us and reported our belief that it was a conflict of interest, it wouldn't be perceived as a conflict of interest because the person that we're reporting it to is impartial and is not a somebody who is subordinate to us. And so that's not the case with Trump. He can't do that because he doesn't have that option. And it's ridiculous to say that somebody else, if Trump's position, would be in prison because they don't have the powers of the authority. That seems redundantly obvious. And the fact that they're troping this out and trying to drum it up in this way, to me indicates that it's not a good faith argument. It doesn't take a lot of thought to follow that train of logic down the line and figure out that Trump is in an impossible situation, therefore, from the logic that they're concluding that by presenting this to a subordinate, that he was somehow colluding or planning on obstructing justice by reporting it. What was the alternative? There is none. And it clearly ignores the obvious evidence that he had reported to the New York Times that he felt this way long before giving that perception over to McGain. So anyways, that's my thoughts on it. Tell me what you think. We'll wait to see what more evidence comes out, but it doesn't look as if anything's going to come out of this. And I just feel like the media is kind of falling on their faces as far as getting the story right and presenting information to people in a clear and honest way. So anyways, comment below, tell me what you think, like and subscribe. I'll hope to have more videos like this out later, so take care.